Our guests today include Joe Alley, who's a partner of Arnall, Gold & Gregory down in Atlanta, and he serves as chair of that firm's securities and corporate governance practice. Jay Knight is a partner of Bass, Berry & Sims in Nashville, and he's head of that firm's capital market subgroup. Jay and his family were filmed on an episode of Property Brothers recently, and Joe has won Jeopardy twice, the TV show Jeopardy twice. So these guys are TV stars in addition to being fine securities lawyers. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. All right, this is my favorite type of exercise, real live hypos, case studies. This is how you really get to learn, I think, the easiest. And so grateful that Joe and Jay are going to be with us. Thanks to Jay for putting together these slides. These guys are actually parse real hypotheticals that come up often. And so live and learn. All right, Jay, our first hypothetical, net income minus goodwill impairment. Take it away.
Okay, so you're presented with this this hypo, and I agree, Brock, with your statement about, the best way to learn this content, which is pretty dry, is to go through hypotheticals and just like from a practical standpoint, like what is the answer when you just put your thinking cap on. So this first hypothetical is a pretty straightforward. You're presented with the non-GAAP measure question about, okay, you have net income excluding goodwill impairment, and both items are listed on the face of financials, and would that be a non-GAAP financial measure? And the answer, if you want to move to the next slide, is yes. And I think this is one to keep in mind. It doesn't matter if the items are both listed on the financial statements. A very common example is EBITDA. You're taking your earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, and all those items are listed on the face of the financial statement. So, the important point here is that you're taking a GAAP measure, which is net income in the hypo, and you're excluding out something else. And it doesn't matter if you're excluding out something that was on the face of the financial statement. So, anyway, just kind of keep in mind that EBITDA is a good example of that the staff clearly used non-GAAP measure. So just keep that in mind.
Joe, non-GAAP mentioned in the press release title.
Yeah, and gosh, there's so much going on here. So we're gonna assume, okay, this is an earnings press release, and that it's going to be furnished on a Form 8K. So that means that the affirmative disclosure requirements of item 10E will apply, which means equal or greater prominence applies. So we're going to assume that first headline, the company increases revenues and EPS outlook, is all GAAP. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt there. And then we look at more than 500 million monthly active users. That looks like statistical information, so I think we're going to give them a pass there. But then we get to record Q1 non-GAAP revenues and EPS growing 29%, 44% respectively. So there are several issues here, okay? First off, we start with the word record. There's a CD&I directly on point where the staff says that if you describe non-GAAP disclosure as record or some other superlative, then you must provide a similar description for the GAAP number. So we don't even have the GAAP number here, but it may be hard to provide, because odds are we don't have record GAAP revenues and EPS. I'm just going to guess, or that would probably be in the heading. So I don't know what you call it. Probably lackluster is not the descriptor that the issuer would be looking for. So it may well be possible that you just have to take the record out. But if you leave it in, the staff is clear they want something comparable. So we've got non-GAAP revenues and EPS. Whoops.
I got you.
We've got non-GAAP revenues and EPS. Presumably, I think they mean non-GAAP revenues and non-GAAP EPS, but they need to, if that's the case, it needs to be redrafted to clarify that. So those are growing 29% and 44%. Well, we need to disclose the GAAP numbers, and those need to be disclosed per staff instructions in a line item before this one that says GAAP revenues and GAAP EPS either grew or didn't grow with these percentages.
Right. I think to add on that, Joe, I think that the percentage is one that particularly comes up in practice where it's easier to understand. Okay, you're actually given a number. The GAAP number was 1.2 billion or whatever. But they think sometimes clients and others think, well, we're going to get around. We're just going to say the percentage increase, and this is a real live comment letter that was pulled down and clearly says, the percentage is we treat that just the same as the actual underlying number. So.
Yeah, I think it's a lot tougher if they just wanted to say we had record non-GAAP revenues. I mean, there's nothing to reconcile it to, but we know it's frowned upon.
Right. Yeah, I think you would have a stronger argument back to the staff if you just, at that point, the staff may get upset at it, but I mean, it's not covered if they don't give anything. So.
I don't think that'll stop them from poking at it though, but you're right.
Jay, non-GAAP and credit agreement covenants.
So this hypothetical 3 here, the company's credit agreement includes a covenant based on adjusted EBITDA as defined in the credit agreement. And if disclosed in a filing, the non-GAAP measure would violate 10E because it excludes charges that are required to be cash settled. A company nonetheless discloses non-GAAP financial measure. And essentially, if we because of the way item 10 has certain exclusions, one of those is going to be cash settled items from liquidity measures. So let's assume adjusted EBITDA in this instance is going to be liquidity. So you'd have to kind of run it through the 10E analysis, and now on its face you could say, well, that may be prohibited by 10E, but there's an instruction, an SEC interpretation that essentially gets around that, but says, notwithstanding 10E, your MD&A is, this is a material item of a liquidity arrangement. It's a material term. I would, it's basically MD&A disclosure with Trump 10E in that situation. That's kind of my terminology there. But you are permitted to disclose that adjusted EBITDA number, even if 10E would otherwise prohibit the exclusion, because that's a credit agreement covenant definition. There's the CNBI that's listed there in the answer that you want to go see, and there's some other disclosure that's around that. It's not just a blanket, yes it is. You have to provide some additional disclosure around that. So, if you encounter that situation, look at that CNBI and make sure you include that additional disclosure. But essentially the answer is yes, you would be.
Yeah, I mean, technically, if it's truly required to be disclosed in the MD&A, it's technically not a non-GAAP financial measure. Right.
Joe, reaffirming guidance.
Reaffirming guidance. So once again, I guess we're going to assume that this is being done in a press release that's going to be furnished on Form 8K, so that item 10E applies. This is interesting. You read this and you see that they say that their GAAP diluted EPS, they're reiterating their GAAP diluted EPS guidance, and then they say it excludes an anticipated non-cash impairment charge. So the first thing you notice is that this is not a GAAP number, and even though the prohibitions of item 10E wouldn't apply, it's clearly potentially misleading to call something GAAP when it's not, and you'll certainly get a comment from the SEC on it, and you just shouldn't do it. So they ought to start off by saying that this is a non-GAAP. They're reaffirming their non-GAAP guidance, but then that raises the question of whether or not they actually gave non-GAAP guidance, or whether or not this is their way of trying to say they're reiterating their guidance, when in fact what they're really saying is that they're not going to make their guidance. So I have to go back and look at their other filings to make sure. But the short answer here is don't call it GAAP when it's non-GAAP, and they are going to have to either give the GAAP guidance, or they're going to have to use the unreasonable efforts exclusion, which allows them to not to not give it if they can satisfy the standard. But since they've already basically disclosed what they need to reconcile, except for the tax piece of it, they probably can't use it and will probably have to disclose their GAAP forward-looking information.
Yeah, this seems to be one where the IR team or others within the company may be trying to maybe, say that we're actually not changing our guidance. It's the same thing, we're reiterating, but we had this one charge for, it was an impairment charge. And so, yeah, these examples come up quite frequently, and it's really just a give and take and trying to make sure you're conveying what you want to investors in your messaging, but also being fully transparent. Like this is more of an adjusted diluted EPS that they're giving, and it's not a GAAP number. So don't call it.
Jay, proxy disclosure with incentive plans disclosure about non-GAAP metrics.
Yeah, so your proxy statement, and Joe had touched on this in our prior video. There's some exceptions in the proxy disclosure. There's the instruction in item 402E that gives, well, here, why don't I start off? I'll read the hypothetical. So, the hypothetical 5. The company CEO cash incentive plan is tied to the achievement of $100 million in adjusted EBITDA for fiscal year 2020. And you give this number in the proxy statement without reconciliation. And it's a non-GAAP measure. So can you give this number in the proxy statement without reconciliation? So it's an adjusted EBITDA number. So you're running it through your kind of non-GAAP measure. This is in a proxy statement. 10E would apply, also Reg G, but 10E is what you're going to be looking at mostly. So the issue there is, do you have to provide the reconciliation? Well, in instruction 402 includes a carve out that says, if you're talking about a cash and a target plan, providing targets that's like related to a material component of the plan, of a compensation plan, then you can give that target. And we can go to the next slide now, Brock. But so the answer essentially is yes, you could give that you could give that number without providing the adjustments, but you do have to disclose how that number is calculated in the other financial statements, just for transparency purposes, so people know that how are you arriving at this, since you're not having to give an adjusted. You can go to the follow-up question to that is, okay, what about the next year's proxy statement? The target was $100 million. Okay, remember that number. Can you give the actual number? So they hit $105 million, and can you give the actual, because the instruction just relates to the target? And the answer there is yes. There's a CDNI that extends that instruction basically to the actual results, which makes sense to do that. It's just more, it's tied to the target and every back. The next hypothetical is just another extension of that. What if you just wanted to give a adjusted EBITDA in the general list of highlights for the year? And that's could be in your CDA, it could be in the proxy statement, CDNA, or your proxy statement summary. You're just wanting to give kind of highlights for the year. And in that situation, the instruction doesn't apply because it's not really tied to your plan. It's not a particular plan. You're not giving, it's not your compensation is not tied to it. So the instruction will apply in that situation. So in those instances, you would need to provide the reconciliation, and there is an instruction and interpretations about kind of where that would go. You may not have to put it the same reconciliation right in the proxy statement summary or the CDNA, but there's an instruction there where we need to go, and so you have to follow that. But the short answer is
so there's a link to the separate vid guide that Joe and Jay made about the basics of non-GAAP, which is a little bit more than the basics. It's pretty comprehensive, so you might want to check that out. Thank you so much, Joe and Jay. It's very educational, always useful to go through actual hypos and case studies to learn what to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.